I'm Dan Craig. I lead the Agile Center of Excellence at Fannie Mae. We're up in Washington, D.C. Really happy to be here today to talk to you. I had put together a nice slide that introduced me as a person, wife and 5 kids and dogs and all that, hobbies. And then I heard this was a 20-minute talk. So it's on the cutting room floor now. And we'll kind of just jump straight to it. So I'm here to talk to you about the evolution of our continuous improvement system. And I quite intentionally chose the word system when I came up with this talk because over the last 3 years, my experience has really confirmed a belief that continuous improvement is really so much more than teams sitting in a room doing a retrospective, right? That it really is this complex and really delicate ecosystem that has to be put together element by element. And the elements must exist, the elements must be vibrant. And so that's the message I'm really trying to drive home today. So let's move on. Okay, so for those of you who don't know Fannie Mae, just really quickly, founded in 1938, towards the end of the Depression, with the mission of creating a secondary market to buy and sell mortgages. So boiling that down, it's just to bring liquidity into the market, to make homes affordable, and to bring things into existence like the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. So that's why we're around. Conceptually, a very simple company organizationally. 2 big business units. We have a single-family business unit, so that's your single-family homes and mortgages, and then a multifamily business unit, which is kind of apartment buildings, et cetera. We've been on our transformation for 4 years. We have just north of 240 Agile teams. We have scaling going on, actually multiple scaling frameworks. That's a whole different conversation. We actually see it as a good thing. I would characterize our teams as kind of sustainably agile. And what I mean by that is that I think we've decently put a floor under these teams where we know what we're getting out of them. They're generally predictable. I wouldn't say they're high performing yet. But more and more the action is not with the teams. The action is in these concepts we're talking about here today, and that's business agility. So I spend much more of my time finding ways to connect these teams to their customers, connect these teams to their leadership, and really invite the enabling organizations, finance, procurement, HR, risk, enterprise architecture, to pivot their engagement model with these teams, to put themselves at service of the teams. I think traditionally they thought they were the center of the universe and teams floated around them, and we're trying to pivot that model a little bit. So that's Fannie Mae. Okay, so I wanted to start with what I believe is for me, foundational core truth of any transformation. And I don't know if there's controversy in this with any of you all, but this is really born out of real experience for me, that I believe continuous improvement mindset, it's not a bunch of empty words. Give me nothing other than a continuous improvement mindset or a culture, and we will get to high-performing teams. I've been on teams that started waterfall back in my XP days, and we found our way to the customer. We found our way to technical excellence. We found our way to the manifesto, right? Conversely, I've been on very high-performing teams that for whatever reason, that continuous improvement mindset was snuffed out. And you can set your watch. It will settle into concrete. Skills will begin to atrophy, and then it kind of just falls apart on you. So it's with this grounding that I joined Fannie Mae in 2016, took over the COE, and 2016 for Fannie Mae was a very big year. We had gone from 30 teams kind of in pilot mode all around the organization to 160. So the COE was underwater. We were doing things that COEs do. We were training and we were coaching, deploying coaches, and we were doing ad hoc consultation. It was just a lot of firefighting. But all the while I was kind of standing back and looking and saying, man, I don't see any hint of continuous improvement going on here. And I boiled it down into these 4 symptoms that I was seeing. So the first was there was no shared vision of what good looked like. So no one quite knew what we were going towards. Everyone had read the Scrum Guide. Everyone was kind of academically plugged in, but we didn't have a shared vision. Second, leaders were really disengaged. Agile transformation was great for the teams. It was awesome what was happening down there in the trenches. But they felt free to kind of sit back and manage via their traditional kind of management techniques. Third, there was no structure for improvement. So there was no connection, save status reports, between teams and their leaders. There was no connection between programs and the enterprise. There was no connection between programs and enabling organizations. So there was no structure for improvement. And then even if all that existed, there was no consistent, meaningful metrics upon which to base a conversation. So we really had nothing. Okay, so a lot of work for us to do. So in the next few slides, the next about 15 minutes, I should have written a better abstract because there's no way to talk about an evolution in 15, 20 minutes. But I'm going to take you through 5 key decisions that we went, the kind of hypothesis and experiments. So to orient you a little bit, you can see the teams in there in the inner circle, right? They're doing their thing. They've got a continuous improvement backlog. Around them's a program. Around that's a portfolio with kind of disengaged leadership. So the first hypothesis we had was if we were to help with that target vision, if we were to somehow depict what good was for Fannie Mae, well then naturally teams self-organize, right? And everyone would begin talking to each other and they would rally around this vision and begin to improve towards it. So what did we do? And you can kind of see top right. We created an agile maturity model. There was nothing magic here. Forget the graphic. There was nothing magic here, right? Level 1, let's get foundationally sound. Let's get transparent. Let's get predictable. There were practices, 67 practices kind of built in along that. And then we supported it with an agile playbook that we published to the wide world. And then we kind of doubled down on teams by adding a survey concept. So every month we wanted Scrum Masters would lead, kind of helping the team walk through this survey, but it was really the maturity model, and kind of gauge where they were. And our hope was that it would be used as a coaching tool, where we couldn't, especially where we couldn't provide coaches. So what happened? There were benefits. So it did actually set a definition of good for Agile for us. And we evolved it every quarter, and it was actually very helpful in defining where we were trying to go. It did bring in a common taxonomy. So when I said, hey, my team's generally predictable, and next we're working on alignment, which is kind of code word for being ready to scale, that was good. And so we had a shared taxonomy, and it really did help the new teams that were just starting up, kind of in that shoe stage, right, to grab onto something and say, well, in the absence of anything else, I know that I can get going on this. So there was goodness to it. There was a lot of negative to it. So it did not facilitate the conversation the way we were hoping that it would between leadership and teams. In fact, it did damage to the relationship, because what leaders did in the absence of any other metrics around, they seized on to that agile maturity metric and managed to it. So if you were a level 1, next quarter I'll see you and you'll be a level 2. And you saw gaming begin to happen, right? And pressure being brought to bear. And then for our most advanced teams, it actually gated them. So at the higher levels of the maturity model, Managers were leading them to adopt these practices in the model as opposed to going where they needed to go. So a lot of damage done. So our next hypothesis was, what do we do about this problem? And we said, okay, let's get an actual metrics program put in place. And what that would do is kind of allow the maturity model to do what we wanted it to do and be a guide, and all the management focus would naturally go to these new metrics. So we created a metrics dashboard. This is a sampling of it. Nothing too interesting here. These are metrics that you all would consider if you were putting them together. I think the interesting thing here is I haven't been at many places where 200 teams got consistent metrics, kind of organically provided to them. So it took quite a bit of time to homogenize the tool set the teams were on and get there, but I think that's the big victory out of this one. So we made dashboards available to the teams and let her rip. And if I had more than probably 10 minutes left, I would probably make this interactive and ask you what you thought would happen, but I'll just tell you. So it did help teams. It gave a consistency of measure. It helped leaders understand how teams and programs should measure at that level. It did reduce a lot of PMO reporting, paper, and that ugly middle I think someone was talking about yesterday. But it didn't do anything that we were after. It again just armed leaders with more metrics to manage. So AMM levels move slowly. Well, then let me pound on you for your velocity or one of these other metrics, and kind of whip you into submission. And because this was not arguable, right? It's right out of the tools. Now pressure was incredibly high on these poor teams. Okay, so we're doing great as a team, as a transformation office here so far. Okay. So our third hypothesis was, it was obvious that metrics alone, data, wasn't enough. We needed to find a way to channel the data properly. We needed to find a way to bring structure and manage the change directly. So what did we do? This time we decided that it was time to actually eliminate that maturity model as a mandated monthly kind of report that had to be filled out. And maybe not surprisingly, it took me almost 6 months to negotiate this. Leaders love their AMM scores. They love to walk down the hall saying, I'm averaging a 2.7 and you're only a 2.5. And so it took quite a while. So be careful with maturity models. So we got rid of the maturity model from the teams. We still kept it as a reference. Kind of, it's up there on a Confluence page somewhere and everyone can go visit it in the museum. And so we brought in Agility Health Radar, the team-based radar. Now, interestingly, the radar had been available to teams for since 2016, since when I joined. My predecessor had brought it in. We had said, hey, we suggest you use this tool quarterly, and it's a good thing to do. 180 teams over time had actually used it, but there was no structure at all. We had not done anything to kind of connect leadership to what was going on in the tool. So we invested some time and actually made the growth portal, really is what it is, but I'm reflecting as a CI backlog. We connected it top to bottom, and we put plumbing in place that allowed teams to escalate up in the right way. And then we didn't stop there. We formed continuous improvement teams. So this is directors, managers, directors at the program level, VPs, directors at the portfolio level. And we focused them on the continuous improvement backlog. And, finally, I think we arrived at the right place, right? So what we saw was we saw an enthusiastic, engaged leadership team for the first time. They were actually very excited to have actionable work. They were excited at the thought of this servant leadership stuff they had heard so much, but they didn't really know how to put it into action. And for the first time, we began to see leaders, or managers, I'll say, make the pivot into leaders. It also did some nice side benefit things in that it began to provide insight to where should future investments, where are common systemic gaps in our learning, and where should we begin to apply investment. Okay, but there were still issues. And the issues were, and this may be the most interesting finding, our leaders had no clue how to do the work that their teams knew how to do. They didn't know how to do work decomposition. So if one of the issues was, hey, we're having problems provisioning infrastructure, that was a big topic, and we'd go through many of these continuous improvement teams where they would talk and they earnestly wanted to help, but they had no clue how to break the work down, how to do the problem solving. It was almost like we were starting over. So there was work to do there. And in that, by the way, transparency, teams had no clue what was going on. Nothing was coming out the end of the process. So the next hypothesis was if we could find a way to close the loop between leadership teams and the teams themselves, that would be it. So what did we do? We actually began pulling, and this is still ongoing, so we're not done, but there's enough that I can share that the results are positive. We put leaders into Scrum teams, not Kanban, specifically Scrum teams, gave them a cadence, and it's actually almost comical. So we directors are the team. We made one of the directors be the Scrum Master on rotation, which offended many, and then we put the VP as the product owner, and we brought in some pretty structured problem-solving work. So everything from just simple work decomposition, like teams might do, but on down to kind of structured problem-solving. Some of this was big. So everything from A3 to Fishbone to 5 Whys, right? We explored all of this with them. And then the biggest mandate was they must perform a demonstration to teams at the program level monthly, at the portfolio level quarterly. And we haven't seen too many of the portfolio level ones yet. So what happened was like bingo. We hit it. So immediate positive effect to the culture. Teams had full transparency for the first time. And I guess the biggest thing is impediments finally started moving through the system. And we finally actually saw something removed from this impediment list that had been sitting there for years. But there's still work to do, right? Always work. So the big thing I was noticing was leaders, though the work was getting done, they still didn't quite know how to prioritize their work. It was how many teams are complaining about that was kind of the measure. And no way to measure the effect of changes. So there still wasn't real conversation much that was empirically based. So our hypothesis was if we could really focus on delivery outcomes, and so this isn't delivery metrics, but it's kind of health of the engine metrics, that we could begin to arm leaders in a different kind of way. So what did we do? We came up with another dashboard. And this one is, we call it the outcome-based metrics. But again, it's health of the engine. And we borrowed heavily first off, how many have read the Accelerate book? Have you all read it? You familiar with Dora? Hands? You ought to look, I strongly advise you look into it if you haven't met them, if you haven't done this reading. We characterized or categorized our metrics into speed and stability, quality, and satisfaction. Most of these come directly, besides the satisfaction, again, come directly, organically out of the system. I think the big work here was that We got this data for 600 assets, right? 240 teams. So pretty powerful. There was a heck of a lot of work to get this just constructed. We made this available. Really, it's at the product level. So teams have visibility, but they're not the ones. They're not really the intended users. It's really product level and family of products is where we're focused. Okay, so for the first time, this is up to the minute, right? We're just starting to use this, and for the first time, we're hearing leaders begin to say, they're sitting in this, I guess, intersect now of continuous improvement requests coming up from teams and metrics organically non-arguable coming from the side. And for the first time, they're saying, you're saying you want to learn test-driven development? Let's look at the metrics together, right? They tell me you're fast, but you're not very stable. How does this help, right? And so for the first time, this balance of metrics to continuous improvement desires from the teams, I guess it's more of an adult conversation, or at least that's the hope. And early signs say that it is. Okay, so I think I'm finishing right on time. So this is our continuous improvement system. I guess the message here is, had you shown this to me 3 years ago, I would have said, yep, these are all good words. Let's have all these words because they all look good to me. The truth is, we had to grow to this. Every one of these represents multiple failed experiments. So the lesson learned for us is kind of apply continuous improvement to your continuous improvement system. I think what Evan talked about, that kind of tenacious, or I forget his word, focus on continuous improvement is one of the big things you should focus on. I couldn't agree with that more. And hopefully you carry something out of our painful journey into yours. Thank you very much.